Chapter 23. The accident inadvertently brought to light a peculiarity that Mama had to deal with every time we went to the shoe store. It should have been a fun occasion. We would set ourselves in a row. Papa's Pacific Coast babies. Floor on one side, door on the other, and me in the middle. We would prop our feet up on the quaint little stools that the clerk could slide himself into. A quick glance would give him an idea of what his job was going to be. Ultimately, his eyes would settle on my foot, and he'd say, "It looks like we're going to have a little problem here." Another clerk passing by would wisecrack, "It looks like a big problem to me." In no time, we would be surrounded by footwear, floor and door slipping into and out of this pair or that, and prancing before the mirror. However, I could never slip my foot into anything. I had to wedge and stomp, all the while being taunted by door, "Ha ha, funny shoes," and by Mama's inquiries to the clerks, "What else do you have?" The complication here was that my shoes were not 2 or 3 sizes larger than department stores carried. That would have just required expert consultation. No, my feet required barely half a size larger. When my search seemed fruitless, Mama would return from the women's counter where she had been drooling over the high-heeled pumps. "Franny, they won't hurt so much after you break them in. Which pair hurts the least?" Having no idea what other options were available, I always had to choose my shoes, not by style or fashion, but by Mama's simple criteria. Mama had little sympathy. She had a theory that women should wear their shoes tight. It keeps your feet from spreading. It's all right for boys to let their feet spread, but not girls. Is it any wonder that I ran around barefoot, or that I broke down the backs of my shoes by wearing them like mules? Papa, who evidently never saw my problem, was infuriated. "Frances, for God's sake, tie your shoelaces." Convinced that my feet were an oddity, I was totally unprepared for what happened in the hospital, after I had been run over. A doctor examining me suddenly exclaimed, "What beautiful feet!" I looked at him quizzically. Was he serious? He began to rotate them gently. Long and slender, high arches, perfectly matched toes. In the time it took to say beautiful feet, I had become Cinderella waiting for the handsome prince to affix the glass slipper. My heart swelled with bliss. This was new to me. I had never had any feature of mine pointed out as beautiful. I had always waited in the background while everyone extolled Floor's features, or told Dor how cute she was, simply because she was little, and had sky-blue eyes and fluffy blonde hair. Sure, Mama had said that my slightly Roman nose was classical, but that was no compliment. Classical was not in style. On my release from the hospital, the doctor told Mama, "You should always give particular attention to Fran's shoes. We don't want her forcing her feet into ill-fitting shoes, like some women who worship the god of fashion." He dropped his chin and looked over the top of his glasses. "And we shed tears for the Chinese women who bind their feet. Ironic, isn't it?" Mama felt chastised. Because of Fran's injuries, she needs to wear corrective shoes. With the doctor's prescription in hand, Mama took me to the shoemaker who regularly half-soled our Oxfords. Mr. Shoes, as we called him, greeted us from a wall of vibrating belts and sanders. "Hello, Mrs. Bigham." He was small and slightly hunched. His hands were nicked and darkened from dyes. "So are we having holes into soles? Never get to heaven with holes into soles, yeah?" He laughed at his private joke. Mama returned his greeting. "It isn't for holes in the soles today, it's... All kids have holes into soles, you know. And if they don't come to me, they have to make newspaper soles, no. Not so good, yeah?" He looked at me as if I was an expert, which actually I was. I had often resorted to newspaper soles for the simple reason that I never realized the purpose of half soles until the balls of my feet were burning, or until Mama objected to the holes in my socks. As Mr. Shoes said, this condition was not so good, yeah, because the newspaper wore out after a short distance, and there you were, back to wearing out your feet again. Fragments of paper would trail along behind, and the victim would be denounced for cluttering the streets or the area around the desk at school, where the handsomest boy in the 7th grade was sure to point out, "Frances Bigham wears newspaper soles." Mr. Shoes continued, "You supposed to tell Mama when comes to holes, no?" "No, but..." "Then Mama can bring the shoes to me and I fix, no?" Mama finally wedged a word in. "No, Mr. Shoes, we don't need half soles today. We need special shoes. Frances had an accident. Let's have a look-see." He grabbed a measuring device from a nail on the wall and had me step into it. "Just a half size bigger than department stores, no?" "No," I said. "That is, yes, I mean, but you need big feets, I think. You a big girl, no?" He chuckled. Big ham girl, yeah? Big ham girls need big feets, no? No, I said. I was hoping that he might point out, as the doctor had, what beautiful feet I had, but his only observation was regarding the size. It suddenly occurred to me that my fantasy about Cinderella had just been wishful thinking. The prince's search was not for the beautiful foot, it was for the smallest foot. What good was it to have beautiful feet if they were big? No one ever spent much time looking at feet anyway. What does a girl do to show off her feet? Walk around barefoot? Papa was constantly upbraiding me for that. After Mama had told him about all the details of the incident, and he had told Mama about every other child in the state of Washington who had foot problems, I was finally allowed to reshoe. I was glad to be out of there. I was embarrassed about my big feet and befuddled by his questions. He followed us to the door. It won't hurt to have the extra special heavy sole for Franny's new shoes, yeah? Yeah, I answered. After the fact, I realized I should have answered no. The shoes were definitely not grass slippers. They were, in fact, clodhoppers, brown leather, totally unadorned Oxfords with plenty of room for my toes to spread out. I hated those shoes. They weren't even comfortable. Dor ridiculed me endlessly, and Papa reminded me every time I left the house, "Be careful of your shoes. They are expensive, you know." The doctor had prescribed that I was to wear the brown monsters at all times, rain or shine, indoors and out, upstairs and down. That probably account for the fact that I was wearing them in the canoe one day when we were paddling across Lake Washington and were almost run down by a Japanese freighter. We had known about the large red and black Japanese freighters for years. Whenever Papa saw them steaming past on the lake below our house, he took the opportunity to give us a geography lesson. They come through Puget Sound, through the locks at Ballard, through the Ship Canal, through Lake Union, and into Lake Washington. They're on their way to the mills at Renton to pick up lumber to take back to Japan. Papa's lessons often developed into extended discussions. They liked to come into the fresh water to kill the barnacles on their bottoms. Any talk about bottoms was sure to catch our attention. It kills the what on their what? We asked. Fleur was sitting on the Davenport working on a puzzle, and by coincidence had a dictionary in her lap. Papa spelled it out. B-A-R-N, as in barn. Barnacles are a small crustacea, Fleur stuttered to a halt. What are crustaceas? Dor inquired. We'll have Fleur look that up. Fleur complained that if she was going to sit there all night and look things up in the dictionary, she'd never get her puzzle done. Mama gladly took over. She loved to look things up in the dictionary. Crustaceans are predominantly aquatic arthropods having segmented bodies, chitinous exoskeletons, and paired, joined limbs. Mama got through it with hardly a stutter. That's what I hate about dictionaries, I said. First off, you don't know how to spell the word you're looking for. And if you ever find it, the definition is a bunch of other words that you don't know. So you have to look all of them up. And it may end up being all wrong anyway, because probably you didn't have the right word in the first place, because you didn't know how to spell it in the first place, and... Papa shut me off. You should complain to Noah Webster. Who's Noah Webster? Dor asked. Apparently Fleur knew without looking it up in the dictionary. He's the guy in the Bible who built the ark and filled it up with animals. They marched up the gangplank 2 by 2 while they recited Pledgela hence ta the flag, I said. Did the Noah's Ark have barnacles on its bottom? Dor asked. No, dummy, Fleur said. There were only 2 barnacles on the ark, and they had to march up the gangplank like all the other animals. And recite Pledgela hence ta the flag, I added. What are barnacles, Papa? Papa was in the same mood as Fleur. If this went on much longer, he was never going to get his brief studied. Barnacles are little animals that build hard shells and attach themselves to a submerged surface and recite Pledgela hence ta the flag. And bottoms are, well, you know what bottoms are, but you don't have to worry about barnacles on your bottoms. Just stay out of salt water. On the day of our confrontation with the Japanese freighter, we girls were in the 16-foot cedar and canvas canoe that Papa had bought after we learned to swim well. It was chilly on the lake that day, so we were still in our regular clothes. I was, of course, wearing my brown clodhoppers. Papa had taught Fleur and me the basics. Never stand up in the canoe, always have the flotation pillows, etc. And stay close to shore, unless, for some reason, you have to detour around something, then get back to shore as soon as possible. If you get out too far, you could be run down by a Japanese freighter. Fleur was paddling in the bow, and I was in the stern. As yet, Dor was considered too small to paddle, so she had settled into her assigned spot midship. I wonder why Japanese freighters can't see us and steer around us, Dor said. I paused in my stroke. That just proves that you don't know any more about steering big ships than you do about steering a canoe. Fleur laid her paddle across her knees. Sometimes no one is steering the ship. Sometimes the whole crew is out to lunch, eating with chopsticks. Just imagine how long that takes. We could only imagine. All of this didn't faze Dor. I don't see any Japanese freighters. Let's paddle to Mercer Island. Fleur said, that would be paddling across the lake. Papa would have a conniption. Dor looked surprised. Why would Papa have a conniption? Did he say we couldn't paddle across the lake? Well, no, but... This trip had never been expressly forbidden, probably because it never occurred to Papa that we would ever think to try it. Dor resorted to logic. How can little kids obey the rules if papas don't tell them what the rules are? Fleur retorted, well, sometimes big sisters make the rules, and little sisters are supposed to obey them. I'm making a rule right now. We are not going to paddle across the lake to Mercer Island. I said, I second the rule. Dor acted like she had been betrayed by her best friend in the whole world. She began to carry on, screaming, kicking, and standing up. When it seemed certain that Dor would overturn the canoe, Fleur relented. Before we started across the channel, we checked the horizon. Fleur said to Dor, for gosh sake, sit down, keep quiet, don't move a muscle, and don't even stick out your tongue, and keep your eyes out for Japanese freighters. Thinking back, I realized that Dor never really agreed to that. We just assumed she had, since it was so completely logical. The further we got from shore, the scarier it got, until Dor announced that we had passed the middle, and it was now time to race to the other side. But racing was out of the question. Fleur and I were exhausted from the first half of the journey. Therefore, Dor decided that she should paddle. Fleur said no, she hadn't even had a basic course in canoemanship, but Dor stood up and began to fight with her. The canoe pitched precariously, and I bravely tried to keep the balance while screaming out instructions. Dorothy, you know what Papa says? Dor was never one to worry about consequences. She wrestled until Fleur knew we were in danger of tipping over and handed over the paddle. Just then, we heard a long, loud blast. It scared us half to death. It should have brought Dor to her senses, but instead, she seemed to be overcome by a sense of heroics, feeling that it was up to her to rescue us. The ship continued to blast. I was getting frantic. Dorothy, sit down, someone is going to fall out of this canoe. It turned out that I was right, and the one that fell out was me. There we were, half swamped, Fleur without a paddle, and me in the water, watching my paddle float away. I didn't dare let go my grip of the canoe. My wet clothes and shoes were pulling me down. The blast was continuous now. We couldn't even hear each other yelling instructions. We just hung on while the big ship steamed past. I was so terrified, I didn't even think to see if there were barnacles on the bottom, or to look through the portholes to see if the Japanese sailors were eating with chopsticks. Then, we were at the mercy of the huge wake. We were battered, banged, raised up, and dashed down. When the turbulence finally stopped, we were amazed to have survived. Everything was bobbing about in the water, the flotation pillows, the paddles, and our picnic gear. I pulled off my shoes and clothes down to my bloomers. We retrieved what we could and rocked the canoe to force out the water. Papa had given us instructions on that too, but it didn't seem to work for us now. Fleur decided that I should stay in the water and kick, and she and Dor would paddle. By the time we got back to shore, Papa had come searching for us. The thing that shocked him the most, after he had observed that the canoe was full of water and that we all looked like drowned rats, was, "How come you were wearing your expensive leather corrective shoes?" "Because the doctor told me I had to wear them all the time." "Well, I'm telling you, don't wear them in the canoe." He needn't have worried. I didn't ever want to go back out in the canoe. Besides, by the time the shoes had dried out, I discovered that they had shrunk, so I was back to limping. Whenever we reenacted the ordeal afterward, telling of the terrible dangers we had encountered, Dor turned it into a comedy routine. The ship's horn was blasting, the canoe was tipping over, and when I looked to Fran to rescue us, all I saw was her brown clodhoppers disappearing into the water.